cloud so we can have track of this video, and give me a couple minutes to connect to our YouTube channel and start live streaming there, please.
Hello.
Hello.
And we are now live streaming in YouTube. Please, Stella, guide us through this webinar. Thank you so much, and I hope everybody enjoys.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for joining. Welcome. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon from where you're coming from. And welcome to the session 8 of the 2021 SDGs Learning, Training and Practice at the UN High Level Political Forum. I'm going to wait a few more seconds just to let a few more people join us, and then we'll begin. Okay, so welcome again. I am very honored to be moderating this session, session 8, titled Accelerating Progress Towards the SDGs Through Education. My name is Estela Castelli Florino Pils. I am a recent graduate, and I work as the community manager at Sulitest, which is one of the co-hosts of this session. The session has been organized by us at Sulitest, together with ICAI and Columbia University, the Earth Institute at Columbia University. So just do a quick introduction to the three organizations. Sulitest has the mission to develop sustainability literacy for all, and we offer educational engagement tools to map and raise awareness about sustainable development. ICAI, the International Council for Adult Education, is a global network that promotes adult learning and education as a tool for active citizenship and informed participation of people. And last but not least, the Earth Institute by Columbia University has the goal to help countries and communities to achieve sustainable development by translating the SDGs into meaningful policies and solutions. We designed this panel to be very dynamic, inspiring, and interactive. So today we will have 3 rounds of panel discussions, each with 3 panelists. And we did so because it is in diversity that we find richness, that we find solutions. Sustainable development will only be achieved with inclusion, and particularly relevant to this discussion about education. We also wanted to bring in the youth perspective when organizing the event. And so I'm more than honored to be moderating this session. As I said, I'm a recent graduate, class of 2021. And at the same time that I saw many of my colleagues joining university with a lot of passion, really looking to use what we are learning to transform in the world around us, especially because my generation is increasingly aware of the challenges that we're going to face in the world that we inherited. I see as many colleagues graduating in despair, graduating afraid, especially with the pandemic, and graduating without knowing how we can transform the world, how we can make the changes we know we urgently need to, and how can we achieve the future that we want to enjoy. COVID-19 brought to light so many inequalities and challenges of education that are often hidden or forgotten or neglected. And it showed us that the burden of environmental and social fallouts, and that these often rest on the communities that are very marginalized. So we not only have to build back better, but we need to bring transformative change, including in how we approach education. The big question is, how can education help to build a better, more just and more caring society? So the objectives of this panel are to discuss using the SDGs as a tool to achieve the 21st century learning skills. And we are guided by the following overarching questions. How can education build bridges and lead towards a more equitable and justice-oriented society? How can SDG 4, more specifically SDG 4.7, bring about transformative education? And what has the global education community learned from the pandemic about reaching the vulnerable and the at-risk population? So before we jump into the panel discussions, we would like to learn a little bit more about you. So I would like to invite you to join me on Slido. We have a few questions prepared. So if you could go to slido.com and then add the code HLPF session 8, that would be really good, because we want to hear, first of all, where you're coming from, where are you tuning in from. So please go to slido.com HLPF session 8. This will also give us an opportunity to allow more people to join. We see Canada, North America, they're represented. Great, I see Brazil. I'm personally Brazilian, but calling in from Edinburgh in Scotland. So I can even put the link on the chat if that helps. Great. Great to see that. We have Austria, Germany, Sweden, Indonesia, South Africa, Nigeria, Belize, Cameroon. This is really getting great. Wait a few more seconds. See someone also calling in from Edinburgh. It's so nice we're reaching this many countries with this event. So wait a few more seconds before jumping into the next. France coming in strong, the Bahamas, Mexico, Angola, Serbia. This is really good. So I'll jump into the next question. That is, which sector are you working in? We would love to know a little bit about where you're working on. So if you could let us know. Nonprofit education, K-12 education, energy, government conservation. Getting many, many answers. Nice, we have a diverse group here with us. That's really nice. Disaster management, higher ed. Good. Really nice. Thank you for answering those questions. It's really nice to, especially during these online events, to know who are we talking to. This is really nice. Leadership training, high school students. That's really nice. So I'd like to start the panel discussions now, but before we do, just letting you know how it's gonna work. So as I said in the beginning, we're gonna have 3 panel discussions. Each panel is gonna have a 15-minute discussion around 2 questions. And then after each panel, we will have a Q&A for those panelists. So please send us your questions during each of the round of panels so that we can maybe propose that to the panelists. So I'd like to begin with the first one. For this round, I am joined by Dr. Robbie Guevara, president of ICAI, a committed popular educator with extensive experience in education for STEM development. Alongside Dr. Guevara, we have Radhika Iyengar, director of education at the Center for STEM Development, Earth Institute, Columbia University. And with them, we have François Germinet, president, SCY Cergy, Paris University in France. Thank you and welcome. Thank you for joining me. The focus of this round will be to discuss how can SDG 4 and more specifically SDG 4.7 bring about transformative education. So I would like to start with the first question. which is what do you identify as the key skills and competencies for transformative education, considering the challenges that we face today regarding inequalities, the pandemic recovery, and the SDGs? So perhaps, Francois, you would like to start?
Yes, of course. Well, thank you. So I'm in charge of the university. I'm president of university in the suburbs of Paris, but I'm also in charge of training for all universities in France. So we have a conference of president of universities, and I'm also running discussions between French president about such issues. And it's quite interesting to see that for the first time during our annual colloquium, our annual conference, that was the first time that the SDG were cited and cited as a major goal, major issue at each roundtable that we were organizing. Even though it was talking about something else, SDGs were coming on the table. And so now it's really something that you cannot go around anymore. And so universities, at least in French, are talking a lot about SDGs and the way to enhance SDG consciousness with students. But it's still hard to do, and it's still an ongoing task. It's still ahead from us, but really we feel that it's moving towards the right direction. So maybe one first idea is to have a better consciousness about SDGs and all issues on climate, on energies, etc. And this is why we promote the Sulitest as one of the tool that we can use in university, in schools, in many different situations and institutions. And the idea, for instance, would be to run the Sulitest at the beginning of the training process of the students, and then at the end, and see if we have an added value of our training between the beginning and the end. If our training have added an added value for this SDG consciousness or not, and if the answer is no, then we have questions for us that we have to face. So that's one of the things that we can do, and we also see that the project-based pedagogy is more and more on the table, more and more used by teachers at any level, and in management, in engineering, in geography, in whatever communication, whatever you can think of. And while you are running project-based pedagogy, then you can use the SDG as the goal for your project, and then label your project according to the SDG. So this is another way to empower students with such ideas. And maybe not to take too much time, and maybe go back to you with questions. We have launched in Cergy, in my university, an initiative which is very recent, that was this year. We decided to open a school of design because we design a school of design driven by SDGs goals and empowering students according to SDG goals. And this is quite a big success. For the first year, we will have more than 100 students in our classrooms, and it turns out, this may surprise you, that it is the first school of design within a university in France. Usually it's in schools related to the Minister of Culture, and it's not related to higher education. So it's surprisingly in France, the first school of design that is dedicated to higher education and research. So this is one thing that we can do to promote SDGs within our programs, trainings, and in universities in France.
Perfect, thank you. Perhaps Dr. Guevara, you'd like to answer this question?
Can't hear my microphone. Can you now
Yes,
hear
we can
me?
hear you now.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, so good morning, and I bring you greetings from Melbourne, Australia. I am on the land of the Kulin Nations, and I acknowledge elders from the Kulin Nations, present, past, and emerging, being a migrant myself. I applaud the focus on 4.7, given that the GEM report, the Global Education Monitoring Report of 2016, has clearly said that more than any other target, 4.7 touches on the social, humanistic, and moral purposes of education. It explicitly links to other SDGs and captures the transformative aspirations of the new Global Development Agenda. Particularly, if we focus on how to achieve this, because I'll use that to get to what skills we need to develop, there are two strategies identified in the Education 2030 Framework for Action. The first action is to develop policies and programs to promote ESD and global citizenship education and bring them into the mainstream of formal, non-formal, and informal education through system-wide interventions, like what Francois has mentioned. Okay. Second is to promote an interdisciplinary, but if necessary, a multi-stakeholder approach to ensure that ESD and GCED are in all levels and in all forms of education. I myself, like Francois, teach in a university. However, from our experience of using these strategies, having interdisciplinary, multi-stakeholder, and system-wide mainstreaming across formal, non-formal, and informal education is easier said than done. So I'm so pleased to be able to focus on the core skills that we need to develop. And when I focus on we, I want to shift the focus away from what other people tend to do, focus on what students need to learn or what teachers need to do to teach students. Coming from the International Council for Adult Education, I really want to value the links between formal, non-formal, and informal. And the first challenge we face is how do we overcome the conceptual and often interdisciplinary and institutional silos that have been known to create barriers to this integrative approach. If we are even to begin to see the necessary conceptual links across the SDGs, okay, and motivate key actors to come together and collaborate across these SDG goals. Okay, this requires that we expand our focus from just looking at transformative outcomes of our projects to focusing as much on transforming the very processes of these projects. The second challenge is it just means that we now need to recognize that what we are aiming for goes against the grain of the accustomed ways of teaching, as Francois mentioned, going to project-based, and more preferred ways of learning of some of our students are not used to this way of learning. Therefore, we will require not only transforming our conceptual understanding of sustainable development, but the implications of this transformation to how we work and how we learn. We have often observed that the most educated generation has brought us to the situation we find ourselves in, ourselves included, but this is also the most educated generation that will find a way to learn our way out of this situation. There is no time to wait for the next generation. The urgency for transformation of the education system is now. And as part of this transformation, therefore, we need to be able to recognize how we need to not just teach differently, but also how we need to learn differently. I'll give more responses to the next question. Thanks, Estela.
Thank you very much. Perhaps Radhika, you'd like to follow?
Thank you, Estela. And I want to echo a lot of what Robbie just mentioned, but just going into details of what skills and also where are we going with SDG 4.7 and what should be our focus. So based on my understanding of where the literature is and what we want to do, especially starting with the GEM report 2016, which I was a core part of, lucky to be a core part of designing the report there. We started focusing on a mission. We started focusing on SDG 4.7 since 2016, but I still feel that our language is still very weak in terms of what we want to do, because it has become an all-encompassing goal. So how do we make it more concrete and more focused, I think, is what countries, all of us individuals need to focus on. So I just wanted to, also reiterate what Robbie said. I think the skills and competencies that are required to operationalize SDG 4.7 is to keep people and its planet at the center. If we keep those at the center, and if we keep the two goals that we are focusing on here, if the question here says inequalities, I think we really need to focus on the justice oriented part as the goal, and the sustainability oriented part as the goal also. If we do that, then we are focused on planetary citizenship, we are focused on global citizenship as our tools, so that we can take those goals forward. And what I mean by planetary citizenship is taking care of our planet, making sure that education for sustainable development cuts across all spans, lifelong learning related approaches need to be followed. And for global citizenship, I think the pandemic has taught us is the SEL skills, social emotional skills, are very key. And especially for global citizenship, we need to be looking at civic engagement. We need to be looking at how do we build all of us as a community together. The pandemic taught us that no one is isolated from anything. We are all connected. So how can we all grow together as equals and become better? How should the focus be on communities? And I'm not talking of just education institutions here. I'm talking of communities as the center. How can we make them as the center and learn from them, so that we can utilize these community related approaches that blend into schooling, and make sure that no community is isolated, and no community doesn't have the reach to make sure that there is justice and sustainability towards the center. So I would really consider our panel to really focus on bringing the communities at the center, and making sure that all our approaches are actually connecting to the communities rather than just focusing on institutions. Thank you, Estella, for your
Thank you very much. No, very powerful message. If I may move to the next question, that is, what are the main leverage points education can use to accelerate the systemic change towards a desirable, sustainable future? Just as a background, when we were thinking of the question, we thought of asking, how can education accelerate it? But the how is a very big question. So we wanted to really focus on what are the key 1-2 leverage points that we could use to accelerate the systemic change. Perhaps Dr. Robbie Guevara?
Okay, you keep us on our feet. Thanks. Okay, I'd say there are two leverage points. The first is to leverage the educational transformation we witnessed in response to the COVID crisis that everybody's still living in. And second is to leverage the concept of lifelong learning, as Radhika has mentioned. In particular, again, from my role as president of the International Council for Adult Education, the role that adult learning and education, I will say ALE, as I have in the background, the ALE, contributes to this systemic change. We are often told that systemic change in education will take a long time, all these big things. But what the COVID crisis has taught us is overnight, the education system around the world shifted from face-to-face to remote learning, home learning, distance learning, media learning, etc. Therefore, we know that if we really wanted to, or if we really had to, we can transform our education system. However, I hope that this transformation will be a more proactive transformation rather than a reactive response to COVID, because my fear is the next transformation might be a response to a protracted crisis like climate change. And I agree that part of this proactive transformation, as Radhika said, is to shift the focus from institutional learning to holistic learning that involves the communities and the schools working together. Because if you reflect on your own understanding, for example, of global citizenship, you will start to recognize that this has been developed really not just in schools, but in relations between the schools and our environment and our communities. So as educators, we need to shift our pedagogy to one that acknowledges the future isn't predetermined. and therefore we are co-creators of our own future. Paulo Freire has said that the banking system of education is only relevant for learning that assumes a predetermined future. The COVID crisis has displayed to us that we are living in times of uncertainty. And therefore, as one of my PhD students has called it, we need to have a pedagogy of problematization. We need to shift from assuming that education is about finding the correct answer to a focus on learning to develop our capacity to ask the right questions and know where to potentially find and develop the answers. But more importantly, again, as both Francois and Radhika said, to act on these answers. The second, we need to leverage the notion of lifelong learning being part of the new SDG 4 that recognizes that we need to learn throughout our lives. This means we need to learn, whether in formal, non-formal, or informal contexts. As part of the lifelong learning, we need to leverage the notion of intergenerational learning that became more evident in the home-based learning that shifted. And finally, as the International Council for Adult Education, we argue for the greater recognition of the significant contribution that adult learning and education plays in accelerating this systemic change, not just of the education system, but in all dimensions of our society where adults are responsible for making decisions of what to do, what to resource, what to fund, and what to evaluate. Not to say that youth are not important. It has to be done together. And so because we need to do it together, we ask you to join us in the We Are ALE campaign. We are Adult Learning and Education that we have launched recently, because we are all learners and we are all educators in this process. Thanks, Estelle.
Thank you. Perhaps Radhika, you'd like to answer the question?
The problem following Robbie is that he says all my points and then I'm like, what else can I answer? He's just so fantastic. But I just want to add a few things here, which is regarding my paper that got published in Prospects, UNESCO's journal Prospects, where I say that, again, bringing the communities to center, bringing the funds of knowledge from the communities back to back to schools and other institutions, I think is one key thing that we can accelerate after COVID. During COVID pandemic, we saw that there were many parts of education that spilled over to the communities. Parents were creating these pods, elder siblings were teaching the younger siblings. So many community-oriented approaches came forward. So I feel that this main leverage points is to continue those systems where we blur the lines between schools and communities. So I think those are really important issues to consider. We at the Center for Sustainable Development, along with my colleague Tara Stafford, who will also speak in a minute, we've created lesson plans. We've created with our colleague at UNSDSN, Mariam, who will also be speaking SDGs today. We've created these databases that focuses on sustainable future, focuses on the SDGs. So I feel that the tools are available. I think the focus now should be how can these tools be made accessible and reach every school, so that we can continue with these, with the access points that we have, the non-formal, informal, formal education blurred during COVID times, and there are so many resources out there available that focus on sustainable futures. I think we need to make leverage out of it, leverage the online connectivity and online resources that we have. Just want to make two final points here, which are very critical to ensure what can we learn towards a sustainable future. One is that this mindset that children go to school and we learn the banking system of education that Robbie just pointed out. I think we need to really move away from that, making sure that children are educated with the justice lens and with sustainability as the focus, I think is no longer extracurricular. That really should be the core. We cannot say that, oh, yes, that will happen on its own. That's not going to happen. And it's not just the responsibility of the teachers, it's the responsibility of the parents, communities, the larger ecosystem. And I really urge us to take this SDG 4.7 not as a vague goal, but something that is realistically possible because of all the resources that are available online. Through our work at the Center for Sustainable Development, we have ed4sd.org website, where we have put in a lot of resources. Teachers are asked to co-create curriculums with their students. Students are asked to work on curriculum. So I think this, this idea of focusing on SDG 4.7, which is someone else has to do. No, I think every one of us has to become a teacher. Either you are a parent or you are a sibling, because we have already done that during the pandemic. So I think that needs to continue, so that we can support the education systems, formal, non-formal, and continue building towards a desirable future.
Thank you very much. Francois, would you like to answer the question?
Yes, and but Robbie and Radhika said everything, and so let me maybe add one point that was already mentioned, but maybe the main leverage is people. And Radhika talked about global citizen, etc. And we talked about the student, children, being a father and a mother, and people and young generations are the main leverage. And if teachers do not want to go there, they will be forced by students to go there. And if they are not forced by their students to go towards SDGs, they will be forced by their own children. And because now they will realize that if there is a planet for their children, there may be not a planet for their grandchildren. So people is a driving force. This is not surprising because we are human, but so it brings a new connections to ourselves. So this calls for better connections with ourselves, better connections with people, and better connections with the planet. And this is not so useful, not so useful. This is not so usual, sorry, in universities to talk about the connections to yourself. We have connections to knowledge. This is the ground of university. At the beginning, we thought that if we bring knowledge, then we have done our job, and there are scientific knowledge. We just we teach this scientific knowledge, and I am done with my job. Then students said, no, you are not done with your job. Then we said, okay, you need a career, professional career. So we will tell you what these knowledge are good for your professional career. And this was for during the past 20, 30 years. And now, and so we say, okay, we give you knowledge, we give you a professional career. I'm done with my job. Now go and leave me in peace. Then it does not work anymore. Now they say, no, this is not sufficient. I want to be in the capacity to build a sustainable society. So you have to help me to have the correct knowledge and to have the correct way of thinking and way of acting, so that what I will do tomorrow I will do it so that I will preserve the planet, and my children and grandchildren will have the planet. So the empowering people and the wish of people to be empowered according to SDGs is a major leverage. And this calls also for learning communities. There is no point in keeping our knowledge for ourselves. There is no point. We are rich about what we give and what we share. We are not rich about with what we keep for ourselves. And again, this calls for ideas of learning communities at any level, between students, between teachers, between countries, etc. So I think that this will grow bigger and bigger, and with connections between countries, between universities. There is no point in having our own resources on transition, our own courses on transition here on the planet, and not sharing them with other people. So I think that we need connections at the level of institutions, of universities, of countries about all this and share.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all three of you. I think the key takeaways, I think, from this conversation is the big emphasis on mainstreaming education for sustainable development at all levels, a system-wide intervention, as Robbie mentioned. And that needs to be interdisciplinary, multi-stakeholder, and really leverage beyond the educational, the typical educational institutions, but also leverage community. And I think one of the big lessons with COVID was also about the importance of helping that transition, right? Helping those teachers, helping the parents, what materials are we putting out? And I think that's really important. And I think the other key takeaway is the focus on while we are doing that change, think about how we work, how we teach, and how we learn. And I think this can really also accelerate lifelong learning. I think us students, we're really eager to learn doing project-based learning, reflective practices, and this type of learning, not necessarily the what, but the how, really can really help us to continue learning as we move forward. So I think this was, thank you so much for sharing that. I'd like to take a question from the Q&A session. Turiaka asked, this is a really good engagement, it's so informative, thank you for that. How do we accelerate holistic education, especially here in Africa using SDG 4? I think Radhika, you mentioned a lot about holistic learning and the importance of leveraging this community-based, the community-based learning. So could you answer that question?
So that's a great question. Holistic learning, I think, is really key here. And then again, I think there are so many resources online that are available to ensure that our learning is data oriented. So I feel that there are so many SDG oriented, lesson plans. We have some. Those need to be integrated into the context where you are, so that you can look at examples that are global, but you can act local. And so I feel that the holistic learning should also include just getting together. There are so many student groups that I see through our Sustainable Solutions Development Network, as well as through the Center for Sustainable Development. We have all these student networks that have been formed locally in countries. We have so many countries involved. I think getting connected to these student groups, getting connected to professors, teachers who focus on these issues. So I feel that there are so many networks that people can join to get aware about all these things, but making sure that you are data oriented and your focus is much more local action. I think that requires communities to be getting together, like our Eco Ambassadors program. We started in small communities in New Jersey, New York, and there were so many students who got together and one project led to the other. We are focusing on microplastics, we are focusing on plastic waste, so many other things are possible. So I feel that the content is available. I think you have to just see what are the issues that you want to look at locally, and then how you can take them forward to resolve any of the local issues. Having some tangible solutions locally, getting the local mayors and local councils involved, having students involved will create I think it will create magic. So I feel that those are the aspects, and then you can get the training from other aspects, from online interventions, and my colleagues will also suggest few other, Tara and Mariam will suggest few other ways of getting that the skill involved there.
Thank you very much. I open the floor if any of the other two panelists would like to add to this question.
No, Radhika said what had to be said.
Yes, so I just want to just briefly, Carol, one of my colleagues from ICAI will actually speak, and I in respect to the context, as Radhika said, the context is very important. And so for me to come from Australia and say what Africa should do is really strange. I find that strange. But in terms of holistic, I'd like to just say what Radhika talked about. I think it's education has been very much about front-end learning, front-end meaning, and as I think Francois mentioned, it's like we focus on learning and testing about stock knowledge and information that's meant to be about securing a job, fitting into society, raising a family. And I hope we don't wait for the time that learning is about learning to survive. I think it's about learning to thrive, which is really, really important. And therefore, how do we shift away from this thinking also that, holistic means always global? Yes, global has always been in the consideration, but I think global is perspective. Action is local. We need to be able to connect that always. When we talk about global, it's not location, it's perspective. And so that's part of holistic. So it's not just interdisciplinary, it's local and global. It's also linking the school where you're learning, the site of learning, with communities. So different levels of holism, I think, is important.
Thank you.
So indeed, it's act local and think global and act local. And for instance, we have at CY Cergy Paris University, we have a strategy on Europe, Africa, and Asia. And in particular, in Africa, we are now working on a brand new university in Senegal, and we help these universities to build its training program, in particular in civil engineering, including transition issues and SDGs issues. So this is a little example of what we try to do, so to help a local university to become to be built and to become bigger. And this is the opposite of, I'm sorry to say this, what France has been done for many years. Namely, many of my colleagues and many universities thought that the best way we could help people in other countries was to bring them in France and having them in our master's degree, etc. This is not the solution. The idea is to go locally and have collaborations. We are not the one who know, and they are not the one who needs our knowledge. We have to share what we know, what we know, and what is your concerns, and what you know there, and have this true collaborations between them. And this is what we try to do in Senegal, for instance.
Thank you very much. Thank you. No, this conversation is really interesting. And I think also the importance of storytelling when we're talking about community-based learning, I think it's so important to get to know the local champions, because I think we tend to forget our own advantages and our own stories of victories. And I think remembering that is really powerful, and you bring the community together around their local stories, their local culture. And I think it's really powerful because we have always learned through stories. And while data, we are very data hungry. I think we want data, but I think also bringing back the power of stories to bring a community together, I think it's a really good leverage point as well. Thank you so much. I'm afraid I'm not gonna have time to ask you another question as we have to move forward to the next panel. But feel free to also answer the questions that were sent through the Q&A through the chat function. Now I'd like to move to round number 2. And I appreciate very much the participation of our first panelists. And now I would like to invite Anicia Yegler. She was invited by Sulitest. Anicia is the Associate Dean for Inclusivity at Kedge Business School. Tara Stafford-Okenzie, Senior Education Technology Specialist at the Earth Institute, Columbia University. And Elsie Wakil, representing ICAI. She is the General Secretary of the Arab House for Adult Education and Development, and also the founder of the Lebanese Coalition of the Global Campaign for Education. So welcome to this second round of panels. And the focus of this round will be to discuss non-formal and adult education, educating our way out of the pandemic. And I would like to thank you, the panelists and events, for considering the short time that we have for each question. I know it's very short, but I think we're already getting a lot of good insights from this dynamic conversation. So the first question that I wanted to ask our panelists is, what are your most important insights from the non-formal adult education and lifelong learning perspective during the pandemic? Which lessons have been learned? Perhaps Elsie, you would like to start?
Yes, thank you. So first, education is based on 4 main pillars: education for the sake of knowledge, education in order to prepare for the labor market, education for living together, and education for being. These 4 pillars must be considered by all types of education and learning. The corona pandemic came by surprise. All teaching and learning activities all over the world failed. Schools and universities were closed, as well as adult education and learning circles, which negatively affected the acquisition of various skills and knowledge, and also imposed isolation for precaution and exacerbated problems by the lack of alternative plans for the continuity of education and learning during pandemics, as well as the absence of investment and optimal employment of modern technologies in teaching and learning activities. Not to mention the lack of technological infrastructure that allows this, especially in the poorest and marginalized places. Each country dealt with that, what is available randomly and unplanned to reduce the exacerbations of the pandemic and its effects. So adult education and learning and life learning, long learning have been negatively and directly affected, including but not limited to 1, closure of all adult education circles classes. 2, adult learners have lost the skills they learned and practiced due to the closure for precaution and distancing. 3, increasing the rates of learning loss, the rates of relapse into illiteracy increased, which means an increase in educational and material waste. 4, increasing demand for adult education and learning in light of poverty and protection and the absence of political will towards adult education and learning for the sake of formal education and the poor funding. So the second question is the lessons learned. So the necessity of employing technological developments in the field of adult education and learning and activating distance learning, especially during pandemics, corona, places of displacement, training of facilitators and adult learners to use the technological media available in their local environments and distance learning mechanism, providing an appropriate technological infrastructure that allows distance learning on which governments and funders are based, setting standards for adult education and learning electronic content, producing various technological applications and making them available through the technological media available to adult learners, like mobile applications, CDs via computer, YouTube channel, etc. Producing short educational videos and broadcasting through various media. Studying new electronic assessment methods in the field of adult education and learning, considering the necessity of traditional pen and paper writing. Face-to-face education is an unavoidable necessity, while taking precautionary measures for small groups for all the educational circles classroom, with the need to adopt digital technological developments in creating teaching and learning. Increasing financial allocations for adult education and learning and searching for flexible funding sources that are not subject to financial conditionality to match these developments and the new educational learning methods. The necessity of developing alternative plans to cope with the symptoms and pandemics, especially in light of the spread pandemics, armed conflicts and political conflicts, especially in our Arab region. Partnership and networking based on defining tasks between governments, civil society, and the private sector in a way that does not allow one to overpower the other while giving various roles to civil society, and it's the most closely aligned and close to the adult learners and their needs. Finally, work systematically between partners so that activities are not repeated and thus the same spending, which results in increased waste and failure to achieve goals. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Perhaps Tara, you would like to follow?
Sure, thank you so much. It's great to be with all of you today, and thanks to the organizers and the speakers so far for all your insights. So I'm Tara, and I'm part of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University. And our education work really spans SDG 4 and lifelong learning. We've had projects supporting formal schooling as well as non-formal education for youth and adults. And I think, as Robbie had said, trying to form a bridge and kind of break down the barriers between those formal and non-formal systems, really doing more place-based learning and trying to connect communities, connect learning to people's communities and to their lives. So some of our programs in recent years have included vocational and entrepreneurship training with young women in Ghana and Rwanda, and we've had digital skills and job readiness training in Telangana, India. And then, of course, as Radhika mentioned, our flagship program, our Eco Ambassadors program, that engages students, youth, and educators both locally around where we are here in New Jersey, New York area, as well as globally, in building skills for both how to conduct scientific research and inquiry to better understand these sustainable development challenges, but also how can we build skills for grassroots advocacy and community organizing to help push for implementation of those solutions. So I think in our work, one big lesson we've learned in this experience of the pandemic is the importance of trying to be flexible in how we can deliver our programs. You know, in the early stages of the pandemic, when we thought it was maybe just going to be a few weeks that we would be at home, we wanted to try to fill that void that the school closures and program closures left. And so we were organizing very regular, almost daily Zoom sessions with our eco ambassadors to try to provide that outlet for them to keep sharing their work and keep engaging with experts, learning new skills. But we also kind of naturally found ourselves using that virtual space to emotionally support each other through this challenging time and trying to support our collective well-being in that way. But of course, we quickly started to realize that the stay-at-home period was going to be a lot longer than we originally thought, and we saw how digital fatigue was really setting in. So we started to think about how we can produce asynchronous content and learning resources that could better fit into all the responsibilities and concerns people were dealing with at home. So we started developing online courses and other multimedia content. And as we were developing that, it kind of brought us to another big lesson of how we need to be more strategic and how we can both highlight the connections between these sustainable development issues and our everyday lives, thinking how we can integrate social emotional learning and well-being into how we develop our content, and also keeping a justice lens into how we look at all of these issues. So one of the first courses we developed was about COVID-19 and how to stay healthy and safe. But along with kind of that information of physical distancing and wearing masks and all that, we also included modules on how we can take care of our well-being, how we can use things like storytelling to have these tough conversations with children in our lives, and also modules about considering those injustice issues and how the pandemic was having inequitable impacts in different communities along racial and economic lines. So I think those are some big lessons where, you know, how can we infuse social emotional learning and well-being into all of our content when we're talking about sustainable development and advocacy, and how can we also consider those justice issues and take that lens. And I think we've seen such a huge growing sense of urgency and desire among the populations that we work with during the pandemic to take action to address all these intersecting challenges of communicable disease, environmental degradation, racial and economic injustice. And we've really started to look at our work through how civic education is kind of the crux where these issues intersect and how they can be addressed. So a lot of times we think of issues like climate change maybe predominantly through a science lens, or that's how it's often taught. But it's a lot more complex than that. So how can we bring in these social justice issues and think of how we tackle climate change and these other sustainable development challenges with those issues in mind as well? So we've been holding workshops, bringing together youth organizers and others from around the world to share their stories of their activism and how to build these kind of more inclusive movements. And some of that has included workshops on storytelling. And, you know, that's such a key thing, we think, to help people connect what they see as the urgent challenges in their everyday lives with maybe something that seems like a more daunting, big issue that they don't really understand of climate change. How can we use storytelling to help make those links and help people see how addressing this big problem will have that impact in their daily life as well? And I think moving these workshops online has had a huge impact on increasing inclusiveness of these efforts. Of course, in some places where we worked, that wasn't necessarily true, you know, like in our programs in India and Ghana, where folks don't have access to as many digital tools at home. We try to keep learning happening, keep check-ins happening using WhatsApp. But of course, it was more limited than places where people have those tools at home. But I think having both, once things start to open up, having both the in-person and the online options is going to enable more than just the people who can fly get visas and everything to attend the big workshops to be able to take part in these. And if we really want to have these equitable solutions, we need to make sure that all those voices are at the table. And so I think that the value of online events and online connection, I think, has really been a big lesson of the pandemic in terms of building more inclusive work. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Anicia?
Yes, thank you. A lot have been said, so I will try to find other insight, but there are a lot. So as you said, Estela, I think at the beginning, younger generations want and push for the achievement of the SDGs, and they often find in their training courses that allow them to acquire knowledge to the SDGs. But when we thought about employees already in place, so adult learning perspective, even if they have this SDG fever, they don't necessarily have the knowledge. So we must therefore offer them training solutions, and as professor, as institution, we have a lot of our alumni who pushed us and are pushing us now in that direction, and more with the pandemic, because we know that with the pandemic the pandemic highlights the need of jobs linked with SDGs, and that even we are more aware of that in all the different enterprises, and so the employees want to have this training. So when we think about initial training, for example, in our institution, we have basic courses, and each student takes, for example, the Sulitest, so they know if they have some knowledge and what they can learn if they don't have a very good score. But for more than that, we also have some specific courses, because if we want to transform companies, and if we want to reach the SDGs, we don't just need sustainable specialists, but we need to have sustainability in each function, and each function in the enterprise needs some specific knowledge. So to ensure that we cover all fields of this knowledge, all our syllabuses are tagged with 1 to 3 SDGs, and we also have designed a maturity matrix with SDN, GRLI, UNIP, so in collaboration with other institutions or other network. And like that, we can map our courses by SDG and by maturity of achievement of these SDGs. And we obtain an overview of all our courses to be sure that we address all the topics needed for the future job of our students, initial students, so the initial training, but of course also with the lifelong and non-formal adult education. And I think that it's really important to give this basic knowledge about SDGs to everybody, and of course for adult education, but also to have that in mind that we need some very specific knowledge, more, of course, for the young people, but more maybe for the non-formal adult education too, because there are already some function in the enterprises, and so to transform and to reach the SDGs, they need very specific knowledge for that.
Thank you very much. I'll move to the next question, that is, from your experience, how can non-formal adult education and lifelong learning help to build a more just society after this pandemic? Perhaps, Tara, you would like to start?
Sure, thank you. So I'm going to kind of elaborate on a point I made before about how, I think one silver lining of this terrible experience of the pandemic has been that the increased inclusiveness of civic life has been enabled with many of the opportunities for getting involved in community organizing and other forms of civic life have moved online. Workshops and other events that previously may have been held in person that prevented, working people, parents, caregivers, people with disabilities, people who lack transportation, which are the people who are often most marginalized and need to have their voices in these spaces. Having it online made those opportunities more accessible to more people. I know also outside of work, kind of in my role as a community activist, I saw how public comment, and of course with our Eco Ambassador program, this is what we're trying to equip people with skills to reach out to city council, reach out to their school boards, speak during these public comment periods. A lot of those opportunities also moved online. So people who previously wouldn't have been able to attend those kind of meetings due to obligations at home or other things, now they're able to have their voices heard. And I think at least around where I live, we saw a huge uptick in the number of people who are participating in those ways. But now that things are starting to open up, we're seeing that some of those meetings are moving back to in-person only. And I think that's a huge misstep. So I think, trying to advocate for hybrid ways of engaging is going to help keep more people having that access. And in the non-formal education sphere, especially those who are working in civic engagement and community organizing, this is something that we can be advocating for. I also think that, the pandemic has revealed in very stark terms for those who may have not been aware before, due to various kinds of privilege, the inequality in healthcare access and outcomes and education supports like digital access at home that have long existed. More people are aware of that now. And I think the rawness of this experience that we've all gone through is an opportunity to build empathy outside of our own identity groups. And non-formal education gives us, it's an opportunity and a responsibility that we have, I think, to use these more inclusive approaches to engage youth and adult learners in understanding the root causes of a lot of these injustices and to build skills for different ways of engaging in civic life. And I think for us, when we're thinking about our programs going forward, to ask ourselves, who stands to benefit most from the kinds of ideas and solutions we're pushing for, and who's being left out or stands to be left out, and having kind of the answers to those questions help us shape and think how maybe we can tweak or rethink our approaches to be more equitable and inclusive. So, right now the Eco Ambassador program we mentioned, we're using GIS tools to kind of help learners understand Miriam will talk more about that soon, but how can we use tools like this through some of our online learning programs to highlight where, people have inadequate levels of access to different services and things like that. So that's one where we're trying to approach this in our work right now.
Thank you very much. Anicia? Would like to
yes, thank you. So I fully agree with Tara. I think that with the online courses now, we offer a lot of different trainings to a lot of people, even if we have to think about people who have some Wi-Fi connection issues. We know that during the pandemic, we have a lot of students, we have some issue like that. So we need to think about that. But I agree that I think that with the online or hybrid courses, we are much more inclusive than before. So for that, it's great. And I think that it's really important for the question, for the second question. And maybe I said before that when the students enter the job market, they want to change things, and they have both the desire and the knowledge. And in the company and for adult education, maybe they have the desire, but of course, maybe not the knowledge. And I think that we need to give the possibility to have this specific knowledge to the adult education, and I think it's to build a better future. It's necessary to offer the basic knowledge to understand the SDGs, because I think that when we want to change something, we need to understand first that. And we discussed with some alumni, for example, in our institution, we thought that some of them don't know exactly what SDGs mean. And I think that it's important first to really learn that and to explain exactly what each SDG means for the enterprise and for the world globally. So I think that I talked before and in the first panel too about Sulitest, but I think it could be a good way to have this basic background for the adult education. And so with that, we can understand exactly the goals and understand an overview of what are the SDGs and which feature we want. But after this first step, I think we must offer some specific courses. And for example, we talk a lot about low carbon objectives. So I think it's important to have this kind of courses, for example, for the adult education, but also we talk a lot about inclusivity in the different intervention. And I think that it's important to learn also that an inclusive film can be more resilient, more efficient. So we have to explain that and to understand how we can be inclusive. For example, what it means that to be inclusive for a firm. So we offer, for example, some specific certificates, but I think it's important too to offer some very specific certificates in links with the need of the employees, but also of the enterprises to change that. And because I think that altogether young generation, but less young generation too, we need to be aware, trained, and motivated, and with all of that, we can reach and build a better future.
Thank you very much. Elsie, could you share with us your insights on that question?
Yes, thank you. They already shared, Tara and Anisha, but I will add to that. So adult education, lifelong learning, how can build a more just society after the pandemic? If we keep in mind the concept of education and lifelong learning, as well as its strategies, which are paying attention to the different types of education, adopting modern teaching methods and reducing dependence on traditional education, bridging and strengthening the links between formal and non-formal education to root for lifelong learning and equitable access to learning opportunities, provide all resources and their diversity to ensure the achievement of lifelong continuity education, ensuring participation or partnership and networking between relevant ministries, civil society, and the private sector to provide all the basic requirements for the lifelong learning. In my experience in my job, in my task in the Arab House for Adult Education and Development, AHED, which adult education, lifelong learning can build a more just society after the pandemic by establishing the values of citizenship and global citizenship through adult education and learning programs, paying attention to the values of tolerance, rejection of violence, and acceptance of difference and diversity through adult education and learning programs and activities, paying attention to women's issues and confronting gender issues, allow space for dialogue, communication, effective communication, and partnership between the facilitator and the learners and each other in what is being learned. 5, paying attention to the professional and craft component of adults by linking education with learning craft skills to prepare the learner for the labor market and to promote continuing lifelong learning. Linking teaching and learning to development approaches to reduce poverty, establish micro-enterprise and entrepreneurship to ensure the continuation of adult education and learning, and to increase the added values of teaching and learning. Paying attention to the education of women and girls to ensure family education and learning, gender equality, and narrowing the gap between them in education. Making distance education available to all without discrimination, provided that it's not a substitute for face-to-face education, but rather complements one another and invest social media and the digital world. Transforming adult education circles, classes into adult education and learning centers, adult education clubs that provide various services as a center of dialogue and education. Paying attention to people with disabilities and the marginalized and giving them space for education, creativity, and innovation. Supporting displaced people and citizens in places of displacement and providing them with basic services and psychological support, especially women, children, and the elderly, throughout through educational and learning programs that enable them to continue learning and integrate them into their communities of origin about returning without missing out on much, recognition of certificates, etc. Paying attention to the skills of the 21st century for learners to increase the motivation to continue teaching and learning. 13, and it's the final one, certification and recognition of non-formal education certificates and their equivalency with formal education certificates to continue lifelong learning. This is from my experience in the Arab world, which I think it's a little bit differs from Europe and Asia or Africa, but these are our strategy to overcome the pandemic and to live with a world without any pandemic for the adult learners and education. Thank you very much.
Thank you to the three of you for sharing those amazing insights and inspiration. I think it's really interesting that you highlighted the importance of education for living together, for the collective well-being. I think it's a time that we are all more stressed, and I think it's really important to teach how we can take care of ourselves and take care of others. And I think my generation, is one that is really aware of mental health issues, but I think it's also important to give the tools of how we could deal with that, and also what tools can we have to facilitate this community organizing, because I think young people, they're all on social media, we are online, we have a presence there, but a lot of times we don't know necessarily how we can use this space. And I think something that it could really accelerate this movement is helping us to use those channels for to share ideas, to share thoughts, to share resources. I would like to ask one question from the audience that came in. That is a really good question. Because of time, perhaps one of you could answer it. It was a question submitted by Vijay that asked, how do you see the digital divide being addressed? I think we highlighted a lot how technology is actually helping us reach more people, but there is a very big digital gap. So how do you see this digital divide being addressed, and how can we bring voices and perspectives of communities that were living in poverty and exclusion but have the lived experience, and how can we bring that into the decision-making process? So if one of you could answer that question.
I have some thoughts.
Please.
So for, my ideas are very practical, I would say. You know, one thing we've seen, I think, during the pandemic, not everywhere, but I know around where we live and in places like Kerala, India, where the government has really done a lot to get devices out to formal learners, right? So that they can continue their formal education. But I wonder if there's more advocacy that we could do, that could be done to have some plans or some information shared about how those devices could be leveraged for other members of the families as well in those households to use for other kinds of non-formal learning and advocacy, mobilization, and things like that. I think there's also advocacy that can be done to governments to regulate telecom providers to make sure that there's connectivity provided in more remote areas, because right now, if it's not profitable, they're not going to invest in those things. And so schools, communities in those more rural areas don't have that access, but governments can do more to make them provide that access. So I think that's another area of advocacy that we could focus on to try to connect more places and make sure more households have access to those devices, and understanding more ways that they can use those devices that they may recently have come into access of because of distribution that happened through the formal system during the pandemic.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Elsie and Anicia, would you like to add?
Sorry.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Anicia.
Sorry. No, I was just thinking, I think that we talk about online and remote courses and so on, but I think that, as I said during the second question, I think Wi-Fi connection, we are not all with the same connection and so on. So I think that the online courses are very great. And I think with that, a lot of people can have access to to things that they can't have without that. But I think we need to keep face to face, and we need to keep that for a lot of people, and not to forget, as BJ say, some people who are in poverty and exclusion. And I think that for that, we have two solutions. We have to develop the Wi-Fi and the internet things, but to help them to have access to that, and to keep some face-to-face things, because I think that without that, we can't be inclusive for everybody.
Thank you.
I can add something. I want to say that you are lucky, Tara, that your government provides some iPads or laptops to the learners. You know, in the Middle East countries, we are now, our government is not giving any priorities to adult education, and especially to provide some laptops or materials, even in the school, normal school. So we had a big problem in Lebanon on this. So this was a big challenge for adult education learners to continue their learning process through online, etc. So we have a success story. One Egyptian learner, she was like, she teach how to use Zoom, and she started to do a classroom to her colleagues, how to use this technology. So it was a successful story for them in Egypt, how to use this accessibility. So really, here we had many challenges. So we don't have electricity all the time, the internet connection is poor. So all together, it's like a circle of we need from the governments to pay attention to these issues to be able to continue in our learning system with the adult education people. So really, you are lucky to do that. Hopefully that we can, our government, learn from your government or from your NGOs better, and to have the accessibility to have all this capability. So I want to thank you, Estella, and to thank ICAE to provide me this space to talk on behalf of the Arab House for Adult Education, on which we are facing in the Arab world. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you also for highlighting this importance of working together in this multi-stakeholder group, working with governments, working with charities to provide this technology when needed, and also giving the support to educators on new ways of teaching, to students in new ways of learning. I think it's really important, and thank you so much for sharing your expertise, your experience, and your insights. So appreciate that. Now I'll move to our third and final round of panel discussions. Now I'd like to invite to join Miguel Mangai, representing Sulitest. He is the Director of Development and International Relations at CRI. Together with him, we have Marian Rabi, representing the Earth Institute. She is the manager at SDSN. And lastly, but not least, Kara van de Hoenjo, the ICAE Vice President for Africa. So welcome, and thank you so much for joining me. The focus of this round of panels will be to discuss children and youth, regenerative and transformative education. And I would like to begin by asking a question that, interesting enough, someone asked that same question in the Q&A. So I think our audience is also very interested in knowing this. That is, curriculums are made top down, but what do students really want to learn? So I will, perhaps, Carol, would you like to start answering this question?
Thank you very much, Estella. Hi to everyone. And I would like to congratulate the panelists who did a good job, and the intervention was so relevant. I think that in my role of Vice President of ICAE for Africa, I'm a young person, and I'm also a specialist of non-formal education. We advocate for the capacity building of youth and adults. We also advocate for the quality of education, because the quality of education is essential in our context. For many years, we fight for the access to the education, but now that we are reaching the goal of access, we need to fight for the quality. And quality means also more funds for education, especially for non-formal education. So as you said, most of the time, programs are designed without including the beneficiaries. And in the past, people just focus on the basic skills, such as reading, writing, arithmetic. But today, those skills are no longer sufficient, because we live in a complex society driven by the globalized economic and characterized by many situations of crisis. We are facing security crisis, health crisis, environmental crisis. So as young people, we need to acquire another type of skills and knowledge. So we need to be able to adapt and to be resilient in this unstable world in which we live. To do this, education should therefore enable young people to have skills such as critical thinking, effective communication, teamwork, solving complex problems, and mastering information and communication technologies. You know, nowadays, we have a lot of information and a lot of fake news. Young people need to know how to analyze and choose the right information that can be relevant for the context. If we come into the domain of sustainable development objective, we all know that people decide the objective at international level, and then they share with countries, and countries now disseminate all those objectives at local and community level. So in Africa, unfortunately, young people are not very involved in that process. So we need to acquire new competencies of critical thinking, effective communication, teamwork, solving problems, and all those things. And also we need to be care of our environment. I'm sorry, I'm from a Francophone speaking country, so thank you.
Thank you very much. Perhaps Marianne, would you like to answer?
Sure, thank you, Estella. I'll respond by using one of our current projects as an example of how we're trying to work towards a student-driven approach to SDG education. So at the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, I work for a program called SDGs Today, and our vision is to advance the production of real-time georeference data for the SDGs. Our work focuses on three main activities: curating, producing, and visualizing timely data for the SDGs, utilizing the ArcGIS Story Maps tool to tell stories about data, contextualize it, and create content that's applicable to a wider audience, and supporting education and training programs by integrating GIS into SDG-related projects. So in line with our education activities, we've been collaborating with Radhika and Tara and the team at the Center for Sustainable Development to integrate geospatial knowledge and tools into the Eco Ambassadors program with a more bottom-up approach. As Tara mentioned, the program equips youth with the knowledge and skills for scientific research and advocating for solutions for sustainable development. So the approach here is very much driven by students, in that we're offering self-paced learn paths that provide an introduction on how to use geospatial information systems, mapping, and data-driven storytelling. And we're organizing workshops on how to use ArcGIS, which is geospatial software provided by Esri, and the ArcGIS Story Maps tool, so that students can digitally share their research projects, what they're learning, to inform their teachers and other students around the world about issues that they're trying to address within the scope of the SDGs. So this is an opportunity for students to learn how their peers across the world are addressing plastic waste and marine pollution challenges, and exchange data and information, and collaborate and brainstorm on solutions. I myself have been very inspired by the work that the students are doing, and their enthusiasm and their creativity, and what they can contribute to developing localized solutions. We're actually having a workshop on ArcGIS story maps next week, and it's open to the public in case anyone's curious to learn more about what and how to approach data-driven storytelling. And so we plan to feature their work at the end of the summer on our platform, and hope that this will be the start of a more long-term process of integrating geospatial tools and technologies in school programs, and taking a more collaborative approach to activities between students from different regions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Gail, would you like to answer this question?
Yeah, well, thanks very much. Well, I don't know if I can answer the question, but I can try to provide some comments on the question. I would like to start by echoing what Mariam was saying. I think the fact that the way the question is phrased is really interesting. I would say, see, if you wanted to know what the student really wants to learn, why don't you ask the students, right? So why don't we start by asking the students what do they want to learn? Right. And if that sounds like really ludicrous, then I'm happy to tell that that's what we've been doing at CRE for the last 20 years, or let's say 18 years, for a very simple reason, is that all of us, even at the very earliest age, we are what scientists call researchers. Right, we are all born scientists. That is the way that we discover the world. The way we learn is by asking questions, finding solutions to those questions, finding some answers to those questions, and going further. And so what we call now research is an institutionalized way to process information of the world by every one of us, and we all do the same. We process that information by questioning, discussing with peers, finding good resources, finding mentors, etc. Now, if we go back to the question of the SDGs, there's a lot of questions about what the curriculum should be. But if we now look at the competence that we need to actually solve the SDGs, we'll see that it's so complex, it's so interlaced that we cannot solve that alone. No one, not a single discipline, lab, research, whatever. And so everyone should be involved in trying to solve that. We all know that. But the key competence is trying to learn to solve collectively. Collective problem solving. How do we learn how to solve together? And this is something that can be learned very, very early on, right? So just to give you a few concrete examples, because that sounds too theoretical. Design for Change is a program in India where 2 million kids have been trained at 4 years old onward to solve issues in the surrounding. And the method is very easy. It is first you feel what is wrong or what is good, and you try to understand what is it that you feel, and so that what is the nature of the issue that is feeling you wrong at a certain step. And then you imagine a solution, and then you do try to implement that solution. And whether you're successful or not, you share that solution with, or the failure of that solution with the rest of your peers. By doing that very simple formula, Design for Change have been able to scale at an unprecedented level, and what they're doing can be done at absolutely any in any settings, because they've been scaling in 70 countries. So what we've been doing at CRE is exactly the same, with more research focus, but we ask systematically our students what is it that they want to learn, and how they want to learn, what are the competencies that they want to acquire, What are the key questions that they have? Like a little bit like Socrates was guiding people, through question and answer. And so, in a way, if we look at that through this lens, and then we zoom out a little bit, based on what we have been discussing with the students over the last 15 years, it's always the same sort of things that are coming along. One is, how do I do care about myself? What do I do to actually be a better person? How do I flourish? Okay, this is not in the curricula, and that should be mandatory, because if you're not able to actually solve the trauma of the past or be a better person or analyze what you are, so how can you actually contribute to the world? The second big aspect is, how do I work with others? How we can work collectively? How can I understand? How can I talk with people that are different? How we can build something together? So those skills of learning how to work cooperatively with people that are from different cultures, different backgrounds, different disciplines, this is absolutely essential. And of course, it comes with all the normal, regular competence like critical analysis, etc. But that one is usually missing. And the third one is, how do we care about the planet? Right. And so this is presumably the ultimate one, which is we all want to strive and have a better well-being, but we understand that this is limited. So how do we do this? And for that, there is part of that is a curriculum, and part of that is about competence, about understanding what really is at stake, and what kind of project or I can undertake. So in a nutshell, learning to take care of oneself, others, and the planet, that essentially captures what the SDGs are about. And this is most of the time missing in education. And we are not talking only about kids. It's about kids, it's about students, it's about lifelong learning, it's about everyone. All the learning or teaching frameworks are usually missing those three targets that we feel are extremely important. So if you want to learn more about that, we have an open alliance with UNESCO called Learning Planet. And Learning Planet is assembling members that are working on the ground on those issues. So it might be a good way to start exploring together how do we actually create learning and teaching methods that are going way beyond the curriculum to actually solve the SDGs.
Thank you very much. I'll move on to the next question, which is, given the pandemic and the educational disruption that it has caused, what roles does technology play based on your experience to make education inclusive? I think we talked a little bit about the question in the previous round, but I think it's a very important question. I ask you to just be aware of time because we are close to the end of the session. But perhaps, Marianne, would you like to start by answering this question?
Sure. As you mentioned, I think we did address some of the points related to this question in some of the previous sessions. So maybe I'll just look at it from more of a geospatial lens. I think that geospatial data and tools have proven essential, not just to monitoring and understanding the SDGs, but understanding how to approach disaster response, climate change action, health, tracking infectious diseases, and many more SDG-related topics. So it's important to help us access more frequent data and more local and granular data. So we need to help future leaders build their geospatial knowledge and skill set to understand the state of the world as it is today, and so that they can make informed decisions for the future in a timely manner. So what we're trying to do is to work with different education programs across SDSN and other networks on how to integrate geospatial information systems and other technologies in education programs, and give students the tools they need to share their research and their findings with each other, learn how to address spatial inequalities, and how to reach policymakers so that they have a voice in how sustainable development is addressed within their communities.
Thank you very much. Carol, if you could answer this question as well, share your insights.
Thank you very much, Estella. In my context with the crisis of COVID-19, the technology has played a big role. So in the way that it limited the discontinuity of the learning. We use WhatsApp and Telegram to continue to maintain contact with our learners. but it also allows us to continue to learn together. In one of our programs, we have developed an application on citizenship, but there was a lot of resistance to use it before the pandemic. But now with the pandemic, young people started to use this application. So digital skill helps to solve a lot of problems, but most of young Africans do not have access to the internet to learn. Indeed, the internet connection is very unstable and very expensive in my context. There is also a big digital gap between towns and villages. In my opinion, to make education inclusive through technology, it will take a lot of investments to equip education and learning centers with adequate equipment. Africans must also develop appropriate technological solutions that are relevant in their context. I would like to use this space to congratulate all the young startups who invest a lot in digital. In conclusion, technology is important, but in my opinion, it is not enough. In our context, face-to-face between learners and teachers is very important for an effective, inclusive, and transformative education. Thank you.
Thank you. Gael, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. So I would also argue that there's the way the question is phrased is quite surprising, because before COVID there was a lot of emphasis on the digital divide, and it's still there, and so it's been so exclusive, and so for the last 18 months it's been increasing that gap, and so but this said, if we now consider only the ones that have access, and as Carol was saying, it's not always the case. Of course, there is a lot of things that the digital tools can do, and we have been arguing a lot about what how it can work for the learners. Maybe two points. One is that it also works the same for the teachers, in a way that, especially with the pandemic, where now you have to realize that everything that you knew disappears because you have to work in a totally different context. Then the teachers, they discovered that they have an open questions, and so they had to work around that, and so they had to collaborate, and so suddenly the digital tools become a way to exchange with peers, to try to find answers to unaddressed questions. And so I'm back to square one, is how do we learn to solve things together? And so that was a perfect example. And so there is actually a lot of programs around that which are very interesting. We have one which is called Teachers as Researchers, and which is scaling amazingly well, because the teachers, they are willing to learn how to cooperate at that level. So I think there is a lot of potential for the digital tools when the digital gap will be reduced, to actually enhance that collaboration at every level, not only at the learners level, also at the teachers level, at the inspectors level, at the health schools level, etc. And so if we now zoom out and we try to see in the future how that could look like, there's most of the courses are already available online somehow, and so the content will be available online one way or another. So in the future, you could imagine a world where, whether that's school or universities or lifelong learning, where what is truly important is to get access to peers that wants to learn the same thing as you want to learn, because then you can collaborate, and mentors that can guide you through the quest of learning what is it that you want to learn. And this is, in a nutshell, what the university is about. You have resources, you have peers, and you have mentors, and it's organized in a certain way. But tomorrow, if we do that online, or if we do that partially online, because there's a lot of learning that's happening face to face, then the classes, as we know, and the buildings as we know, can go. Essentially. And so there is just one thought that I want I would like to stop with is, what about if we could create an open campus where everyone would be free to learn what he wants to learn at his own pace, by finding people that are like-minded and that are interested in learning what they want to learn, right? And so in that context, which is already, we can see the premises of that on the internet, that would be quite a fantastic way for everyone to be contributive and to be invited to contribute to notably solve the SDGs. I think there is something here which may be a dream today, but might be a reality tomorrow. And for that, some of the tools that we need are already there. We are building some of that. Other partners are building others. And I know that in every corner of the world, because of the pandemics, we have been massively advancing on those ideas that were very futuristic 2 years ago. I think now this is something that's more tangible. So I would say if we want to be truly inclusive, we need to fix the access, of course, but net we need to fix the access to resources, to peers, and to mentors. That's the only way that will be truly inclusive. And this is not out of reach, but it needs to reorganize absolutely everything.
Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing that, and especially how technology can be inclusive, but only if we have access to that technology, right? And that's not the case. And I think it highlighted again the importance of asking the good questions, and how asking questions differently might also help us understand more systemically the issue that we are facing. And I also, to the question before of what students want to learn, I think it's also important to ask how we want to learn, right? I think I saw in myself and also in my peers a big appetite for active learning, not only sitting in seminars, but doing problem-based learning. I think those were the moments I learned the most. And I think it gives that agency to the students of not only, okay, that's the content, but how do you engage with it? How do you ask yourself the big questions too? And what it was said before, asking who is being left out because of this, who are we including, who are we favoring? And I think teaching that, I think, is also something that there is a big appetite from youth to that. Because of time, I think we had a few questions, some specific questions to the individual panelists on the Q&A, but because of time, I think I would like to move on to the last part of our session, and perhaps I would like to invite the panelists to answer directly in the Q&A function, just because we have less than 5 minutes to close this session. But thank you very much for sharing your insights, your experience. It has been really a valuable round of panel discussions. And also, I would like to thank all of our 9 panelists, my colleagues at Sulitest and co-hosts at the Earth Institute and ICAI for organizing this very, very inspiring session. I'm moving now to the last part of the session, and I wanted to mention a quote actually from the book Earth in Mind on Education, Environment, and the Human Prospect, in which the author says, "There are legitimate grounds for hope in hard times, but not one speck of ground for wishful thinking of any kind. There's no anonymous they who will figure things out." And while this might sound negative at first, what I really like about this quote is that it takes away the focus from third person, from the anonymous they, and invites us to focus on the first person, on I, on we, on what we can do. And as Robbie Guevara mentioned earlier, I think we are all learners and we are also all educators. And I think this is something that perhaps as youth, we don't realize that we are also educators. We all have the power to influence the systems around us, whether you are a dean, a teacher, a student, an intern, or a manager. You can inspire those around you, teach those around you, touch those around you, and your impact can reach those even far away from you. And to achieve sustainable development, we truly need all of us, all of our collective intelligence and collaboration and community engagement. So before we close, I actually wanted to invite you to consider the question, how can I accelerate progress towards the SDGs through education in the space around me, in my school, university, office, community, family? And I'd like you to not only consider this question, but also share your ideas with us. So if you could go back to Slido, where we were having our interactive piece, and perhaps we could share the ideas to how we can answer this question. How can we accelerate progress towards the SDG through education? And the idea of this is to really, for all of us, to live this session with an action to take tomorrow, to take today, to really accelerate this. So please, if you could go back to Slido, slido.com, and then put the code, if you are not logged in yet, put the code HLPF session 8. and answer this question. Yes, educating ourselves. Please let us know your thoughts, your one sentence answer to that big question that's not easy to answer, but I think it's important. It's an important one to consider. Yes, delivering inclusive education to people with visible or hidden disabilities is very important. Demand from government and international players, sustainable building skills, social safety, education policy, and challenging that. Never underestimating our power, definitely. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think for me, that's definitely very inspiring to see that, and I hope that's for you as well. And while the answers are being submitted, I just wanted to let you know that today we wanted to make this discussion very interactive. And for that, we didn't want to make presentations of our own co-hosts organizations. But if you want to learn more, materials will be uploaded to the event page later on. You can also get in contact with us, visit our websites. There are a lot of information out there. And yeah, you're welcome to follow us on social media. And I hope this was a very inspiring session. And keep sending us your answers of how you can accelerate progress towards the SDGs through education, because it's really inspiring to see all of those answers. Again, answering to the question we were having just before, sustainable tech solutions to consider offline access. Very important. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think we are hitting the last seconds of the event, but I just wanted to say a big thank you to you for tuning in to the session. Big thank you to Sulitest, ICAI, and the Earth Institute for co-organizing this event and also offering me the opportunity to moderate it, and also to our 9 panelists for sharing their expertise and insights. It has been truly a very inspiring and insightful section. And I hope with this call to action, it is also a session that will promote you to start making actions today, tomorrow. And together we can accelerate progress towards the SDGs. So thank you so much for joining. I think with that, we will close the session. And I truly appreciate your participation today. Thank you very much.
For your
Goodbye.
participation.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you very much. Bye all.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you all. Thank you, Estela.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Estela.
Thank you.
Thanks, Elsie.
Thank you, Robbie. Thank you, Estela, for your wonderfully moderating. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you, Katarina and Ricarda as well. Bye.
Good
wonderful
good
job. Bye.
Bye.
Amazing moderation.